Good morning, everyone. This is Pickle, and today we're not playing Pokemon Reborn. Today we're just talking about it. So, this is going to be kind of a special video. I'm going to try to keep my intro a little brief just because I've got a lot to cover. But I wanted to take a moment to make a little something to highlight the Pokemon that we've been using throughout our run, and thank all of the people who have volunteered to have their namesakes immortalized in this run of Pokemon Reborn. We had a total of 43 volunteers, and I trained up 158 Pokemon. So I think every single person had at least 3 namesakes by the end of it. And I know that while a lot of these people volunteered as a sign of support, they may not have had the opportunity or inclination to watch the, 160 hours of content that we've put out for this game. So, I wanted to give an opportunity to just kind of tell them a little bit about what their Pokemon did. Maybe that'll give some inspiration for people to seek out some moments where they might have shined if they don't have the chance to watch the whole thing. And I'll also be sending out a little thank you to each of them if they haven't seen it yet. They should be receiving it before the video goes up. So yeah, I'm just gonna run through these. I'm gonna try and keep it relatively brief because, as I said, there are 43 volunteers to cover. And even if I go to a minute a piece, that's a 45-minute video, and I'm gonna try and not make you go through that. So, catch you in a minute. In the interest of simplicity, I'm gonna be going through these in the order that people signed up to volunteer. So, we have to start with the person who started this off, whose fault this is, Bry2K. They were the one who recommended this game to me, and now over a year and 350 hours of my life later, we've completed it. Bry2K had 3 Pokemon that they represented. They asked for a Jolteon. That role went to someone else, and it kind of ended up working out for the best for Bry2K because Jolteon does not get a lot of coverage moves. And you know who does? Ampharos, who ended up being an MVP throughout several sections of the game. Late game, we ended up making a Thundurus, and I know Bry2K enjoys Alolan Executor. I don't even think we ended up using it, but I still enjoyed just naming a few Pokemon after people just because I know they enjoyed the Pokemon. Next up, we have Nick. Nick's old username was Bulbasnorlax, so I knew exactly what they needed. Got both the Bulbasaur and the Snorlax, but we got both of those pretty late. So early game, it also requested Ice types as his preferred type, and I figured Abomasnow was kind of somewhere between the Bulbasaur and Ice types that he wanted. Great weather setter early game, and Articuno, once we actually got it late game, was not a frequent Pokemon, but we had a few situations where we needed something that had pretty good mix of bulk and speed and got the freeze dry ability, and hit all of those buttons. Crocodile was one that almost made me regret my decision to try and use as many of the Pokemon that were recommended as possible, because Farfetch'd is not terribly usable in the early generations. However, it ended up being one of the first Pokemon I got that got False Swipe, and so I ended up using it throughout the early game as my lead Pokemon a lot of times to help catch other Pokemon. And I feel like that went a long way. Late game, we ended up with Gengar. We didn't end up getting to really use the Kyogre, and unfortunately Gengar doesn't get Levitate in this version of the game, but still pretty fast and hits pretty hard. Bagel is my cohort in content creation. You can find him over on Twitch at Bagelodian. He loves fairy Pokemon, so I was happy to get him as many as I could, especially since I knew he'd be willing to take on more of a support role. He was really excited when he got Whimsicott, even though its primary use is Tailwind setting. And Carbank and Diancie were great as Trick Room setters. Primarina is one of my personal favorite starters as well, and its Z move is really useful. It broke several fields because of the way that the game works, so it actually lets you get rid of the Dragon's Den field, which, having a fairy type in against dragons, is also pretty good, turns out. For a while, Beldarin got overshadowed by other fighting types early game, but once we got going, I think Krogunk had a couple times where the sewer or wasteland terrain ended up with us needing a poison type so that we could get through. Late game, we got a Lucario, and once we got that Megastone, definitely saw some use. And Terrakion is one of them that I haven't really used before. Like, that trio is our Pokemon. A lot of the legendaries I haven't really gotten a chance to use because they're so late in the game. And Terrakion was one that really impressed me, just with not only its moves, but it has a really interesting typing that I enjoyed. Next we have Terra. I know Terra loves ghost types, and getting a spoopy plant like Gourgeist was perfect. Gourgeist was in early for the pickup ability, which got us tons of extra items early on, and also hits pretty hard and gets Shadow Sneak as a priority move, which is great. Mega Swampert, that Swift Swim ability goes a long way. Earthquake is a great move, and we ended up using her a lot for that. Unfortunately, we had a lot of good fire types by the time we got Chandelure, so we really didn't get a chance to shine. I think it got used once or twice, kind of in the mid-game when we needed the coverage. Mark is the one who took a lot of Beldarin's early game thunder by also requesting fighting types, and me being pleasantly surprised by Hitmonchan. Breloom is also one of my favorites, so getting a chance to use it is always something that I enjoy, but Hitmonchan with Fake Out Mach Punch ended up just being able to break a lot of focus sashes, and the 3 elemental punches and getting the Iron Fist boost on them made it also just very good from a coverage perspective when we ended up needing a little bit of an extra boost on a team, being able to switch in, Fake Out, Ice Punch, the flying type, Mach Punch to finish something off. It was great. Monkey has been watching the channel for a long time, and I was really excited to get a chance to highlight some of their choices. Mega Charizard X we didn't end up getting a ton of use out of, but Mega Blastoise was definitely had a few moments in the mid-game where it got to shine. Unfortunately, as I've mentioned a couple times, bulky Pokemon and especially grass and water types I found to be a little lacking throughout, just as far as, the fields and the enemies go. However, Gyarados, which I know he didn't request, but it was one of my Pokemon from my Nuzlocke run that I really wanted to get in, and Gyarados is good, if you didn't know that. So I was very excited to get a chance to use that again as well. All of this is kind of Mr. Ed's fault as well, as it was actually his suggestion that I try recording Lufia 2 in the first place, which turned into this channel. He had some odd requests, and I really didn't know. Emboar is hard to use. Didn't get a ton of use because of that. Greninja I was expecting to be better than it was, but I had a lot of trouble finding good spots to fit it in on team. However, early game Camerupt was one of our MVPs by a large margin. Earth Power in general is a great move, and Camerupt had that very high special attack early game, and Eruption, which is really good. Plus, the fire moves like Eruption and Lava Plume also had a lot of field changes, which was great for this Robin. When I had to pick a random name for a Pokemon that I knew I was pretty much just using once for a gimmick, I was really glad it ended up being Creton, because I knew he would understand and be willing to keep watching. He asked for Scyther, and we eventually got there, and Caesar ended up being great. Early game, he was Armor Crow, which ended up soloing a level 90 Garchomp, and he was our Golem for one of the other gimmick wins where he had to explode. We ended up using him again at the end for the same purpose, and we also ended up, because he likes steel types, I threw Celesteela in the late game, which ended up having a great use in one of those final legendary battles. Dynamite was the lucky lady who got chosen to be our starter, and Blaziken got a ton of use early game and did great. Fortunately fell off a bit, but late game we were able to pick up one of the ghost types she requested, which ended up being Lunala. Once we got Lunala, I think it was in about 75% of the parties towards the end of the game, and just wrecked everything. Also very tanky, which surprised me a little bit. Finally, they happened to hate clowns in real life, and when I needed somebody to be a Mr. Mime, I just had to troll them. Sorry. Ryan is another one that didn't really get any of their favorites because other people happened to choose and roll them. But they asked for steel types, and everything that we ended up naming Ryan did great. Mawile got a lot of play during the Mega game, especially once we got the Mega Stone. Heatran was one of the first Pokemon we got in the post game that basically just stayed in the party for the next however many episodes once we got them, until we got towards the end of the game. And Stakataka was a surprise MVP during the last encounter of the game. So Ryan, if you have not been keeping up, make sure you get, or at least check out the finale episode, because Stakataka is clutch. I was very excited to try and use Sylveon for Fen, and was a little bit disappointed because I had been using it in Scarlet Violet, and the Terra Fire makes a huge difference in competitive viability there. That being said, Sylveon is still great, and did find some use in the early and mid game. Delphox got a surprise return for, I think it was the second to last battle, where they just wrecked a bunch of stuff. Victini got a couple uses late game. I think it wasn't one that matched up with what they requested, but it's the same typing as Delphox, so I figured I would give it a shot. And we didn't end up getting a good chance to use Xerneas, which was really disappointing. I was really looking forward to some Geomancy setup sweeps, but the chance just never showed up. Ice Pickle likes burps. They were our Pidgeotto early game. Altaria had a lot of great niche uses throughout, anti-weather options, and then or just very tanky with the Mega. I think we did once or twice. Decidueye, I was a little bit disappointed we didn't get more opportunities to use, especially because its long reach ability actually gets boost. It gives it boosts on certain fields, but the typing just never matched up with the fights as I was planning them out. Landorus, I saw a lot of. You saw some Landorus. I saw a lot of Landorus in the Battle Pavilion, and while I was grinding for for candies and other stat boosting items, while I was prepping my team. So, MVP there. It's a shame not more people like bug Pokemon, because there's some really cool ones out there. That one ended up being an essential sweeper for a few sections. Cricketon, I believe it was the grass gym, I could be misremembering. One of the grass fields that got boost, or where bug type moves got boosted early on, was amazing. Rabombi was used all throughout as a fast, powerful bug and fairy type. And Pheromosa came in at the end and was a really essential part of our Mewtwo team. Cat is not a cat person, which I do find it a bit ironic that she keeps getting feline Pokemon in my runs just from random chance. However, hopefully she appreciates that I finally got her some puppers. So Arcanine, we had two different builds of Arcanine that we used, one special attack, one physical attack, and that we used at different points throughout the game. And Lycanroc got a lot of use, especially on Victory Road. Their Z move destroys pretty much any field except for the New World. So we were able to get rid of a lot of the glitch and inverse fields that we ran into with that. Shorty Fury clearly has an eclectic taste in Pokemon. It's such an odd mix. Milotic is a bulky water type we used a few times during endgame. Typhlosion we used a lot during midgame is an aggressive fire type. I really wish that Typhlosion got a Mega form, because it's a really cool Pokemon, but I didn't feel like it is able to keep up once we got into endgame. Let's see what they can do with it. Walrein was a random pick that we got early on that we got some good use out of, especially when we needed a good ice type. And Banette, don't think we ended up getting more than one or two uses out of, but again, it's completely out of left field compared to the others. Some really interesting picks there. I was expecting to get more use out of Boon's Pokemon, but a lot of them just didn't come up at the right times. Ms. Magius had some really good mid-game use. We didn't get Mimikyu until pretty late, so even though it's a relatively strong Pokemon, it didn't end up getting a lot of specific uses. I think it's partially just because of the way the fields worked out. Drifblim was actually our surprise MVP a few times. It was definitely clutch, especially at the end, the Mewtwo fight. So definitely check that one out if you have not. Phyllis seems to like bulky Gen 1 Pokemon. They asked for Rhydon and Tauros, which we found good uses for both of. Tauros was actually really good at Glitch Field because he's Gen 1 mechanics. Rhydon can use Eviolite, which gives it a big boost to its defenses, and I needed someone to be a Hariyama, and it seemed in the same kind of vein as those, so I went with a Guts Hariyama at one point for a Trick Room party, and ended up being very strong. Kylo asked for Psychic types, and we started out with a Grumpig early on. It was actually one I've never used and ended up being great. They ended up getting a random roll on my Ludicolo, which ended up coming in clutch many, many times. They asked for Slow King, but I went with Slow Bro because it worked really well in one of the parties I needed, and that ended up being a major player in the first, or in the actual like Elite Four and Champion Gauntlet. And endgame, I decided that Kylo could play our role as Mewtwo, because of a very old inside joke between us.
You got Mewtwo? I have everybody. That's freaking awesome!
Emma was another one that chose a kind of mid-tier starter that we didn't get until late game, and I love Empoleon, but I wish that there was something more that they would give it, just another tool in its arsenal. That being said, it did get used a few times, and later in the game, we ended up making use of his secondary request of Steel types, picking Jirachi and then later Solgaleo. They ended up doing a lot of work in the few times we got to use them. Aggron actually came in clutch a few times as well, just because of its bulk and some of its special abilities. Star was our primary ice type for a good chunk of the game. Alolan Ninetales is one of my favorites. It sets hail, it supports with Aurora Veil, it hits really hard and really fast, making it great against dragons. A lot of dragons are quad weak to either ice or fairy, and we ended up using Weavile a few times, but I think Alolan Ninetales was definitely Tessara's primary form and probably one of the most used Pokemon throughout the game. If you had asked me when this started, I would definitely not have expected to say that Nidoking may have been the MVP of the run. Big Fella came in clutch. It was an early evolution, and we got a lot of early use out of them for that. Earth Power came in really important against a lot of Pokemon because Earthquake got nerfed in several fields, and even late game when a lot of early gen and early game Pokemon were being phased out, Big Fella kept coming back, and we end up, I think even during those last few fights, we ended up with a Choice Scarf Nidoking in a few sections. Excadrill is awesome if you can get Sand set, and unfortunately it didn't work out as often as I would have liked. But the times it came in clutch. Lopunny is neat. I think we ended up using it a couple times, and Yveltal got a ton of use during the end game when we had it, because it is broken on New World Field. The Way loves dragons, especially bitey ones, so we gave her Garchomp when we got a chance. I was a little surprised that it didn't get as much use as I expected. Early game, she ended up getting Noivern, which was awesome. Noivern being one of my favorites, and especially because there are several fields where sound moves get boosted, like Boom Burst, which Noivern not only gets, but it's very good with. Geo was our primary psychic type for most of the game. We got a Hypno early on. I replaced it with an Alakazam as soon as I got access, partially because when I mentioned it, Geo said that Hypno was creepy. We got Cresselia early on in the post-game, and it's one of the best bulky Pokemon that we had. Gets Trick Room set up and is just generally good at holding down the field. I was very excited to see Toucan on someone's favorite list. Alolan Way clearly likes bird types, flying types. We ended up getting Toucannon in with a Bullet Seed setup in kind of the early to mid game. Tornadus came in a few times, but it was pretty late and didn't have a ton of use. Same with Salamence, actually. The main usage for Salamence was actually in the 3-on-3 battle against Mewtwo. Yeah, which I believe the video is definitely not Mewtwo. And I don't think it even attacked during that. The biggest one on this list was, I assumed, was going to be Talonflame. Talonflame is good, but it actually got nerfed between Gen 6 and Gen 7, and this uses Gen 7 mechanics. However, when I got to endgame, Talonflame ended up coming in clutch at just the right moment when I needed it, and ended up in our final party. Brio is clearly a person who knows what they like. Garbodor is not a Pokemon I'd ever use before. It was one of the kind of quasi-clone Pokemon that was created in Gen 5 when they made a whole new dex. I've used Muck before. I've always liked the design of Muck. Never been a huge fan of Garbodor, but it actually surprised me. We ended up using it for Toxic Spikes a lot early game and just for getting poison down, but it also just is relatively bulky, and its stench ability gives a chance for us to, or give a chance to kind of help protect it even further. Megatron asked for dragons, and I know that they are a fan of Godzilla, and they are a dog person. So when I got Zygarde 10%, I knew that this would be a perfect fit, and that was definitely their most used of the various Pokemon throughout the game. Druddigon got used during the Big Top fight, I believe. Hitmontop came up a little bit earlier on. Savali and Infernape each got a couple uses, but Zygarde was probably in about half of the battles during the post-game once we got it. Vish asked for fire types and ended up with one of my favorites in Alolan Marowak and one of the best within Cinnabar. Both of these got some decent use, especially Alolan Marowak is a great early game because it gets tons of immunities with its typing and its Lightning Rod ability, as well as some good coverage moves. And Incineroar with Intimidate is really powerful. It gets Fake Out, and it is able to easily debuff and switch in on Pokemon. It's pretty bulky as well. Palossand I ended up throwing in because of it being kind of similar to Alolan Marowak in a weird way, and it actually came in really clutch a couple times as well. There's some situations where we wanted to Trick Room on a water field, and it is very good in that specific situation. Unfortunately for Drew, several people asked for electric types, and we got a lot all around the same time we got Helioptile, which means it didn't get a ton of use, although there were a few times where its specific was a parabolic charge ability were very useful. Charizard, however, many people asked for the Charizard. Drew ended up being the lucky one to win that dice roll, and they got our Charizard Y slot, which became a great Sunsetter and Fire Blaster through the later parts of the game. Vortex joined a few months in and came in with some awesome suggestions, a lot of comments. Their Crocodile was a great mid-game Pokemon. The Metagross that was named after them was amazing throughout the late game. We used Zapdos a lot in the Battle Pavilion. Now, they asked for the Drapion, before I actually had a good opportunity to use it, but I ended up finding that it was another good false swiper, so I brought it in to catch a few Pokemon in the late game as well. A lot of people asked for Jolteon, and unfortunately Jolteon doesn't have a lot of coverage moves. So Ashura won that Jolteon lottery, and I immediately needed to use a Alolan Raichu in a specific situation because of its Surge Surfer ability. And I felt bad not using Jolteon after we just got it, so I named the Alolan Raichu after Ashura, and it actually ended up being one of our most used Pokemon because it is awesome on the water fields. We also ended up using Latios several times late game, and it ended up being one of our clutch conditions against the Mewtwo fight. Early game, Ishtar ended up with Sharpedo and Torterra that I didn't find a lot of good opportunities to use. I think they each got 1 or 2 uses. Aurorus was another random role that I needed for a Trick Room and came back a few times. It was actually it was another one of the surprisingly good Pokemon. Late game, Magearna got named after Ishtar and ended up being one of the most important Pokemon for the post-game after I got them into our party, including the final party. Neona is another one where every time I obtained one of their Pokemon and got it trained up, I ended up not being able to find exactly the right niche for it. I think Lilligant ended up on 2 or 3 Sun teams in the early to mid game. Adium Mismagius is one of the regional variants that was unique here, and I was a little disappointed by that. I felt bad with that one. Beedrill. Beedrill is not one of the best Pokemon, objectively, but it's always been a really cool Pokemon, and I'm really glad I found one opportunity to use it in the late game. There was a very specific situation, and Mega Beedrill was the only answer, and it made me very happy. Enevian was low-key one of our most used Pokemon, in that we named our Ditto Enevian as it was one of their requests. I don't think it got used in battle much, but, you know, in the daycare center, it got used quite a bit. They requested Aerodactyl, which came up a few times, ended up being one of my major rework strategies during the late game fights. Regirock, which I didn't really get a good chance to use. Tentacruel only came up a couple times. It's pretty fast, but it isn't the easiest to use in a lot of situations. I've talked about the water types being a little lackluster with the fields throughout this. However, they also ended up as our Pelipper, and setting the rain, especially for Mega Swampert, ended up being a really useful strategy, as well as being a really good team player with things like Tailwind and Wide Guard. Jules RM's Pokemon were a bit of a roller coaster ride. I really like Hawlucha, and it came in really useful a few times. We trained up a Hippowdon, but I don't actually think I got around to using it. We used Ho-Oh, which was one of the requests, a couple times during the late game. Ho-Oh is one that I had never used before that I was really impressed with. Conkeldurr, they had requested fighting as their type, and Conkeldurr ended up being another bulky Guts Pokemon, which were really important for the Big Top field early game. And Virizion is another really cool one that I'd never actually gotten around to using before, and got a lot of usage in the mid-game once we got the legendary trios. Leda was another volunteer that had some really interesting requests. I hadn't actually used a Mantine before, and they are actually surprisingly good. I got a lot of use out of them as a bulky Pokemon in the mid game and kind of as a team support. They're also another one that gets wide guard early. Scolipede and Zekrom I don't think got a lot of use. Steelix actually got a few specific niche uses kind of in the mid game when we were dealing with a lot of caves because of the way its abilities interact with the field. Which was another one that I had a lot of trouble finding uses for the Pokemon they requested during the early game. But during the last section of the game, Gardevoir suddenly ended up getting a ton of use. The Psychic Terrain Field boosts speed for telepathy Pokemon in this game, and that meant Gardevoir was awesome. We also ended up using Giratina a couple times during the late game, very bulky and some really interesting typing. Brought them as a surprising contender for a few sections. I'm pretty sure Not Brandt volunteered partially to troll me, but they asked for some awesome Pokemon. So we end up with Umbreon, which is another bulky Pokemon that unfortunately, because the fields didn't get a ton of use, but still came up a few times. Ninetales actually got a clutch moment in one of the late battles that was completely calculated out, but otherwise was kind of our secondary Sunsetter when we didn't have the Mega Stone available for Charizard. Tapu Fini, I've talked about water types and bulky Pokemon a few times. It's one of my favorites, but it just didn't work out. But overall, they were a great part of the team. Metal was a late volunteer with good timing. Tyranitar was one of their requests, and it came up at just the perfect time. Tyranitar's awesome, and it is one of the few Pokemon that sets sand well. But Naganadel, they requested dragons, and that was an awesome pickup that I had not really used before. Poison is very good against certain Pokemon, especially once Fairy got added. They were also lucky enough to win the role for Rayquaza, and I hadn't used a Rayquaza before, and it is just as ridiculous as I expected. Pete was one of the late volunteers who, unfortunately, everything that they asked for had already been picked by the time they signed up. However, they did also ask for dark types, and they ended up with Mega Houndoom, which I had not used before and ended up coming in real clutch. Hydreigon, which is easily one of the best Pokemon, period, as well as one of my personal favorites. And Yveltal, which they ended up getting Yveltal as well as Big Fella for one battle. It's complicated. Yveltal was really important for the late game, and I didn't want to have two versions of Big Fella in the same party at the same time. Tapu Koko is a great example, however, of why sometimes it pays off to leave comments, because Pete mentioned sweeping Battle Pavilion with Tapu Koko when they were playing Sun Moon. And since I didn't have anybody who had requested Tapu Koko, that anecdote made me go, oh, I should name that after Pete, because they had that memory, even though it wasn't in the category that they had requested. And it ended up also being a great Pokemon to sweep through things like the Battle Pavilion. Shock. That thing I just said about all of their choices being picked when they signed up applies to Toby as well. It ended up working out pretty well because Claydol came in a few times as our Trick Room setter. Latias is really good. That was the one request we were able to meet. And they ended up as our Darkrai. And Darkrai is really good on several of the fields throughout the late game. Dark types in general are pretty broken, but they also get increased sleep chance with their Dark Void move, which is absolutely ridiculous. So they saw a lot of use and had a lot of clutch saves for our entire team. Leisa joined right as we were wrapping the main game, which meant unfortunately their Skarmory didn't get a ton of use where it would have been in its prime. Suicune, unfortunately, I've already talked about the folly of bulky water Pokemon with the way the fields work. Really hard to get them usable. Did come up a couple times, but not as many as I would like. Palkia, however, haven't really used a lot of the boxed legendaries, like Palkia in play. And Palkia ended up being one of the ones that is exactly my type of Pokemon, a kind of bulky, mid-speed special attacker with a lot of great coverage moves. I still didn't get to use it as much as I would have liked, but I did squeeze it on a few teams, even when I probably shouldn't have, just because I really enjoyed using it. And that wraps up our summary of all of the Pokemon that we used throughout our run. 43 volunteers, 158 Pokemon. Thank you all once again for being a part of this project. This is, basically a year of my life that you were very much invested in, or where I was very invested in you as well. And I had a lot of fun playing this one. I will definitely be doing some other projects where people can volunteer, get their names on the screen as well. We'll probably be doing more Pokemon down the road. I need a little bit of a break first. And other than that, there are still a lot of other games where it's come up. In the past, I've done XCOM 2 runs where I've named after viewers. And I have a couple strategy games that I'm thinking about having volunteers contribute names to as well. So we'll see how that goes. If you have any suggestions for that, please leave them in the comments. If you are one of the volunteers and you wanted to leave some final words, this is also a great spot to leave a comment as well. Thank you all once again, and as always, have a good one.